How do I explain to my 7-year-old why blackface is inappropriate for Halloween costumes? My white daughter is super excited to be Tiana for Halloween. She is excited that she has curly hair like her and has a costume picked out. She told me she wished she could paint her face and change her hair color to match Tiana. I told her painting our faces isn't something we do, which she replied, "You painted your face white to be Ursula last year?" Besides telling her that monster and animal character colors are okay to paint on ourselves, but humans aren't the done thing. How else could I have handled the situation? How can I follow up and explain this to a 7-year-old? I want to help my daughter learn to be appropriate and respectful. Thank you. Update. Thank you to everyone who put time and effort into their responses. I truly appreciate your help. Update 2. I spoke to her and explained why I said no. We briefly went into the history and why it can be so hurtful. I told her it is unnecessary for us to put anyone in that position of fear, anger, pain, even though that was never our intention. She agreed and is now focused on finding a frog. Some of you raise your families differently, but it is important for our kids to learn respect, both to give and earn. We use manners, learn how to listen, apologize when we make mistakes, and make changes to our behavior when we need to be better. Thank you again to all who put effort into helping us navigate this conversation.
When I was about her age, I wanted to be Jackie Robinson for a living museum at school. We had to dress up and do a report, and I was convinced that if I didn't paint myself black, then I would fail. My mom was honest with me and sat me down. She explained slavery, segregation, and blackface to me. She told me that people would call black people bad names and insults, and then they would dress up as black people to make fun of them because they thought they were better. She thought it was better to be honest, so I knew why it wasn't okay. And so she didn't risk me doing it later when she's not around.
Hey, father of 2 here, and their mother is white, and I'm Polynesian. Straight and simple is the best way. My daughter is dark like me, while my son is like her pale German mother. My daughter recently has been more aware of their skin tone difference now that she's almost 8. Last Halloween, she wanted him to dress up as the little boy from Encanto, but mentioned his skin tone. Here's what I said, verbatim. A long time ago, and still sometime today, people used to and will make fun of people with dark skin. Many people who were white-skinned like mommy would paint themselves black to make fun of darker-skinned people, like me. So out of respect, we do not paint our faces the skin color of other people. She understood instantly and actually replied, "People are mean sometimes. Kids are smarter than we give them credit for."
I completely agree with you. I think a 7-year-old could definitely understand this. My cousin recently informed us they prefer they/them pronouns. It took my 5-year-old about 10 seconds to understand, and she was better at applying them than me in real time.
Kids are super malleable. I remember being a kid when gay marriage was legalized in the States, and I was extremely surprised and annoyed that it wasn't already legal.
I remember my family in the 90s always calling my aunt's GF her roommate. So I really just thought they were roommates together because they wouldn't show affection in public. One night, my parents had an emergency they needed to leave town for on short notice. Aunt Amy let us stay over a few nights and watched us kids 6 and 8. We had an awesome time with Aunt Amy and her roommate Peggy. Then it was time for bed. In true 90s fashion, we started pumping up the clear neon blue blow-up mattress for the floor. And then it dawned on me, we only have one blow-up mattress. Where will Peggy sleep? My aunt explained that they sleep in the same bed together like mommy and daddy because they love each other. I asked if they were married. She said not yet. One day they will let us and we will be. I didn't understand because, they did everything together like my parents. Long story short, after that night, we deemed Peggy as Aunt Peggy, and she has been to us for over 30 years now.
7-year-olds can understand what more than that, and I think we owe them the whole truth, not a whitewashed version. When I was 7, my dad and I read Huckleberry Finn together. We then had a serious talk about racism. He started by telling me about slavery. He then talked about his childhood, when slavery has been outlawed but the Jim Crow laws were in effect. He gave examples like segregated drinking fountains. I had trouble understanding why white people did at first, but he helped me understand that black people were seen as less than human. He continued with a discussion about the history of the civil rights movement. He also explained that, despite gaining the right to vote, there are still instances where black individuals face prejudice and unfair treatment. I don't recall if he addressed the activities of extremist groups or acts of violence from that period. I do remember him describing the difference between how cops treat white and black people when they are pulled over. He had direct experience with that one after a road trip with his black friend. In essence, he explained white privilege to me in a way I could understand when I was 7. In the case of blackface, I would talk about that, while in the part where I gave examples of how black people were treated badly. Because racists use blackface to hurt black people, it's something we will never do. 7-year-olds can understand a lot more than most people think, and I believe that by 7 white kids need to understand how horrible racism truly is, and that their life experience is very different than those of black, indigenous, and people of color.
This is absolutely the way. Speaking to children about difficult topics is really way easier than people think. Just speak plainly. Remember, they are as smart as any other human, just lacking in world experience and first-hand knowledge, but their brains are thirsty for information and ready to be taught.
I student taught 5th grade in 2009 on a military campus. And in a social studies unit on the concept of rights, I asked students to discuss 2 questions. 1. Should people be allowed to marry someone of the same gender? 2. Do people have a right to health care, even if they cannot pay for it? I cannot imagine asking those questions a mere 15 years later. And it is a shame. I still have my students' reflections, and one in particular described how much it impacted her to be asked big questions that she hadn't thought about before. I was surprised, and am not bragging. It just made a huge impact on her to be given respect and challenged. I admit even then it was bold, but nowadays to even raise such issues would be dangerous in many places. And in others, the danger would lie in the art of holding respectful space while children express bigoted views with which they were raised. But they can absolutely do it, and deserve opportunities to be given an education that is relevant and to be guided gradually with information that is actually age-appropriate, rather than coddled until they plunge unprepared into all manner of adult content. Why it couldn't happen now? The real goal wasn't the definition of rights or beginning debate skills or whatever I wrote on the lesson plan. It was the more subversive but entirely true fact that you get to come up with your own opinions and decide, based on your own knowledge and beliefs, what is right or fair.
This is why we need to continue to teach all of history to children, not just the good parts. History was not kind, and people need to know that so it doesn't get repeated again.
Kids are indeed smarter than we give them credit for. It's all about using simpler words, and then they get it. Like, I was able to understand my chronic illnesses by the time I was about 6 years old. And when I worked with kids and they asked about it, they would understand me too when I explained.
I think being honest is the best choice. Say something like, people used to paint their faces dark to be mean to people who looked like Tiana. Even if that's not what we mean, it would still be mean now.
This is how I would do it. My mom had to have a very similar conversation with me as a child, and she was just very honest about it. And I still remember it because I didn't want to hurt anyone else, so it just made sense to my little brain at the time.
I used just a disgusting amount of my aunt's makeup to turn my blonde-haired, blue-eyed self into Pocahontas, and my grandmother had the same talk with me. It worked. I remember being afraid that I was being unintentionally mean, but it left an impression, and I didn't attempt it again.
So much isn't meant to cause harm, but it still is harmful. I wonder if it comes from the fact that it is popular to make fun of traits someone holds, but it's not meant in a mean way. For example, my mom is overweight, and my papo calls her gordichu instead of gordita. A lot of my family does that, so maybe that is the root, but it shouldn't be done or only reserved for close family who says they're okay with you making fun of them, not their race or ethnicity. This actually just made me remember when my Tio came up and he told me he knew Chinese and started mimicking it. I hadn't heard it yet and believed him until my mom told me later it was a joke. I was only 8 or 9, and I still remember being confused how making fun of someone's accent or language was funny. It's weird too because people made fun of my grandparents' accents all the time, especially my papo. That's probably why he didn't laugh. I remember him being mad.
It depends on how old you are. Seriously. I was born in '64, so 1968-76 were my prime Halloween years. At that time, costumes were heavily geared toward cultural costumes, not just Halloween either. Most of the people in my generation probably had construction paper, Native American headdresses, headbands, and every school teacher in America knew that a few snips on brown paper looked just like leather fringe on Native American clothing. Mind you, Western TV shows were the thing, And on TV, every week you saw multiple white actors putting on their makeup and native costumes. I grew up in Nevada, and every member of my white family had Native American-made moccasins, and we all had suede fringe vests. Not to take anyone's culture, but my mom was a seamstress who wanted to support Native Americans keeping their culture alive. My mom's gone, and I can't ask, but I would bet that she bought them all from the same people, year after year, and it must have been a tradition for her of some sorts to get them so many years in a row. As we outgrew them, they disappeared, but I found some wrapped up in her things. Little tiny moccasins from a long ago childhood. Anyway, all that to say, things have really changed, and rapidly, and the rules are different in different places. In SE Asia, I am expected to purchase and wear a traditional sarong to many places as a show of respect to the culture. In my own country, to wear that piece of clothing is seen as disrespect. In Bangladesh, I visited a women's shelter, where the women survive by making and selling traditional embroidered garments. I bought every single one they had for sale, and every pillowcase and wall hanging. All the beautifully made sarongs sit in bags here in the US, in my closet. They've never been worn out of sensitivity, and that is sad too. All those hours of embroidering, late into the night, at a shelter where young ladies saved from human trafficking and organ harvesters are taught how to sew and embroider to start their new life. Wearing these clothes would teach an amazing lesson. Where did you get that blouse? And I am sorry their voices are silenced. When I clean my closet, I pull out the bags and look at the workmanship. And on some pillows, you can see how their work got better from start to finish.
I remember panicking one year when my young son said he wanted to be the Black Panther for Halloween. Crisis averted, as he ended up going as Ant-Man. But I'll be honest, I didn't have a clue what to say had he wanted to paint his face black. I think it would have been a game-time decision between me and the husband on how to best approach the issue. When in doubt, keep it simple and open and as honest as possible.
The best part is he can still be Black Panther without having to paint his face. It's crazy how kids are the shining example of racism being taught, because they really don't think about race the same way adults do at all, until somebody teaches them to, through actions or words.
I'm totally dating myself, but I never saw any black kids who dressed up as the Tobey Maguire version paint their faces white. I don't know much about SM after this point, sorry lol. It just kind of separates us. Like kids can be whatever they want to be, and focusing on what color that whatever came in is silly.
My mom taught me about blackface at around that age because she loves older films. She would literally sit me down, show me, and be like, "This is why it's wrong to paint your skin a different color." My estranged bio dad, honestly, this was a rare W for him, was an animator and would use old animations to also teach me about how open racism was. Looney Tunes, and he had a boss that had a Song of the South VHS that I watched.
You could tell them that blackface was a way that white people used to make fun of black people, and it isn't nice.
What if she says, "But I would never make fun of Tiana. I want to be Tiana."
This would be a great time to discuss intent versus impact. Sometimes, even when we mean well, it can still hurt people, and it's important that we take those feelings into consideration.
It is really this simple and uncomplicated. You don't need to explain things to kids as much as you need to be a good example for them to follow.
I think both are key. I agree kids are really fucking smart, but sometimes you need to be very direct so that things aren't misunderstood, particularly depending on age. Nick Henning insert Reddit thread about things people misunderstood for way too long as kids.
Then it is a great moment to say, even if you mean well, painting your face would be like bullying Tiana, and that's what people might think you are doing.
In an age-appropriate way, it might help to explain the history of how blackface was used by white performers for years to mock and belittle black people in culture. The idea of historical context informing our actions today might be tricky for a 7-year-old, but at least she'll understand that blackface is different from whiteface somehow.
Using the idea of bullying can help solidify it for her. It should be a term she's familiar with and should know. It's a very bad thing.
Show her and tell her the history. By her age, I was already called a nigger on the playground and had a full conversation about race and race relations with my parents. She can handle the truth. Maybe even watch the movie again as an example of the discrimination when they bankers wouldn't let her buy the restaurant.
I know stuff like that happens, but whenever I hear stories of kids being forced to face the horror of the world when they're so very young, it just makes me sick. I am sorry you had to go through that as a kiddo. You're right. Black, Indigenous, and people of color kids don't get the option to ignore racism in their childhood and youth. They're literally the victims of it. So there is no reason, and I know OP wants to do this, to not start these conversations young.
It's okay to teach your children about race. Let me rephrase that. You should teach your kids about race. Our Skin is a great book that addresses race and racism in an age-appropriate way. This one is pretty straightforward. People have painted their whole face black in order to hurt or make fun of people with darker skin tones. We respect other people, and part of that is making sure our actions don't hurt other people. So even though that's not what you're trying to do, painting your face all black will hurt the feelings of a whole group of people. Signed, Elementary School Counselor.
To be fair to her, it really is stupid that we can't safely costume as people because we admire them. But that's what you get when people were very shitty in history to other people. Tell her that her admiring Tiana is totally cool, but that historically people used face paint to mock other people for having dark skin, and it's still considered a bully thing to do. Help her dress up, though. If she wants to wear Tiana's gorgeous dress, she can totally do that.
I do a lot of cosplay, a hobby relating to dressing as characters you like, and generally nobody is going to say a thing on your character's race. I am white, and I've done a traditional Chinese character. I wanted it to look authentic, and I looked at makeup that would suit the character. But what I didn't do is stick tape to my face to stretch my eyes to look Asian. You can dress as a character of any gender and any race, but don't alter your own race to match the character. Because that part of you is not a costume, and especially for people of minorities who are being actively mocked for those features and can't simply remove them at the end of the day.
I told my daughter what it is. She's white, passing, and wanted to look like her best friend in kindergarten. That human skin colors aren't costumes. And a long time ago, and still even today, some white people and even other races say and do hurtful things to people who aren't the same color or ethnicity to them. And they used to paint their faces and dress rudely and pretend to be the worst ever made-up version of whatever group of people they were making fun of. It's just not a nice thing to do. People's skin colors aren't costumes. And specifically with black people, people are still basically picked on for everything about being black. It's okay to think others are beautiful, but we aren't going to steal their beauty for ourselves. I don't know if I did it right, but she seemed to understand, and still does.
I wish the whole world was as innocent as your daughter. Then this would never even be a thing.
You'd be amazed by the number of adults who need this explained to them also.
There's nothing intrinsically wrong with painting your face black, just like there's nothing wrong with painting it blue. Some people are just unable, or more exactly, unwilling to understand context and intention, and prefer to be offended for no reason. Now go paint yourself black and pretend to be a bat or a cockroach or whatever other black thing you want.
It's so weird that you or anyone would think it's an inappropriate thing to do. Like dressing up as Tiana would be making fun of her race. Baffling. A little girl wants to dress as Tiana. She had a very good point about Ursula, and it doesn't matter if she was an octopus. What is good for the goose is good for the gander, no? What was never okay was when white supremacists would paint their face black and burn black individuals' homes down, or mock them, or hold rallies against them, or paint themselves to represent apes, idiots. That is wildly different than what your daughter is asking to do. Adults should know the difference. It's actually sad we coddle an entire culture to suggest they are incapable of such discretionary thinking. Inadvertently, we are suppressing free thought and teaching society that everything must be controlled for them. Although, I do think it is not necessary to dress as Tiana. You would need to paint anything, as dress speaks for itself.
When mine wanted to be Winston Zeddemore, and I needed to explain the same, compared to the year before when he was a silver-painted Tin Man, I explained that some people use blackface to hurt people's feelings, and that we, humans, have a responsibility to treat others respectful. That if even one person saw it as hurtful, would it be worth it? He came to the decision himself.
When my youngest was 6, he wanted to dress as our black dog for Halloween. I made a floppy-eared headband, a tail attached to his pants that wagged as he walked, a haute fur ruff on the chest, and furry black and brown arm and leg covers. I also painted his face exactly like the dog's face, black on the top with brown on the lower jaw. It was adorable at school and indoors. However, Halloween was quite cold, so he had to wear a coat over his costume. Just the tip of the tail stick out in the back, and in front, it looked like he was in blackface. His older brother was embarrassed to be trick-or-treating with him. This was in the year where celebrities in blackface had been on the news, so people were even more scrutinizing than usual. I had to explain at almost every house that he was dressed as our dog.
Be honest and use the real words. If Black and brown families are forced to tell their babies about the dangers of racism at a young age for safety, then it's our responsibility to inform our kids at a young age to help create safety for everyone. I was a white kid raised in a brown family. My Nana didn't hesitate to tell me that I was going to be treated differently in life than my cousins, why, and what that privilege meant. They were some of the most impactful conversations I've ever had, and I'm so grateful that she did. I've been telling my girls about racism, appropriation, white privilege, and white responsibility since they were about 4, and they not only comprehended it, they have questions about how to do better. Plus, your daughter will likely admire Tiana even more once she understands our history and how strong and brave she truly is. You could even use the scene in the movie where the realtors call out a woman of her background as a teaching moment.
I would explain it like this. When Grandma Stet was little, there were some people, white people, who didn't like people who looked different than them, black people. They were really mean, and one of the ways they made fun of black people was to paint their faces black. It was really mean of them to do, and it's not okay to do it now, because we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. We like everyone, no matter what color they are, so we make choices that are kind and thoughtful. You can still dress up as Tiana, that's okay, but we won't be changing our skin color. I would be sure to not gloss over the fact that it was white people who did these unkind things. As a white person, she needs to understand how easily her actions can cause harm to others. It can be done age-appropriately, but it needs to be addressed. I did it with a class of 3-year-olds for Black History Month. Very simple, but understanding how we are responsible for our own actions and how they affect others.
When I was a kid, maybe about your daughter's age, I wanted to dress as Mr. Rossetti from Animal Crossing for Halloween. I'm white, and Rossetti is a dark brown mole. Similar to your daughter, I wanted to look like Rossetti, so I asked my mom to paint my face brown. She refused. I asked why. She didn't tell me why, and I just did it myself. My older sister was also put off, but didn't explain her discomfort, either. This was the year that the group of Chilean miners being stuck in a mine shaft was worldwide news, and my neighbors thought I was dressed as that, and I was so upset. How could anyone think I was dressed as someone of another race? That's so offensive. Why would anyone ever do that? Obviously the brown paint is for another reason. It took several years for me to make the connection myself afterwards, and I'm still mortified by it today. You've gotten good advice so far. Telling her directly that being a white person who paints their face to look like someone of a different race is generally upsetting to other people, and has been used as a way to be racist, even if that's not her intent. But I just wanted to add that if you don't tell her, she might experience something that'll be incredibly embarrassing to her in the future.
I just want to say, this is one of the best, most compassionate Reddit comments I have ever read. People are being treated with respect and not belittled for asking advice on what could be a loaded discussion.